Hello and welcome to Section 6, Part 5, where we're going to look at interfacing to our Teams Managed component that we just created in the last part. We're going to start our implementation of that in the entities. We're going to go to our player controller. So this will be where we handle any player-related things for the actual physical player. So I'm going to create a new section here. And we'll have public. And under protected, we're going to have two things. One's going to be a function. It's going to need the U function tag, so it's going to come from a delegate, and that'll be one on a team change, and that's what we're going to call it. So and that's going to need the same signature as on change team delegate. So if we come to our Teams interface, delegate up the top here, it's going to need this signature. And before I implement that, I'm going to bind to it. So we're actually just going to do that in begin play. Begin play. So let's just add one. So for a player, all the team related stuff and the implementation of the Teams component, or a Teams interface, is on the player state. So we want a reference to that interface. This is just the Teams one, not the team manager, and that's going to include the include the H file. And we just cast from our player state. From that, we can get the team change delegate checked and bind to that. There we go. So now we can implement that. I just want to do that, otherwise I'd get that in there. So in here, I'm going to put a log, just so we got something that shows when a team changes. And then here is where we'll do what we need to do when we change teams. So we're going to need some stuff for that. And one thing we're going to need is a reference to our Teams Manager interface. And we're going to use for that the script interface. Now this is the Team Manager interface. And we're going to have our forward declaration for that. We don't need the asterisk there, but it is a pointer. And then to assign this, we're going to use a function, a public function here. So this will be, so what we'll do with this function is just, we'll check if we've assigned it before. If we haven't, we'll assign it. Otherwise, we can just say, yeah, it's there. And we don't have to keep looking up, it's not real performant to search for components. So we only want to do it the once, basically. What we'll do is we'll check, do we have that reference? And we use on that interface script or script interface, we can use that get interface to see if it's valid or not. You can see that that's a pointer, interface type pointer. And then in here, if this is the first time we come in, it's not valid and we need to get it. So we're going to need a reference to our game state because that's where the component lives on the game state. We're basically going to, what we're going to do is we're going to assign that team manager interface script to, we're going to find the component by the interface that's on it and then assign that interface to that. So we're going to need a reference to our game state. It's going to just be the game state base. We don't need to cast it to any special, like our own game state class or anything. We just need the object and we can get that just from the world. So now that we have our game state, we can get a list of components on there that implement that interface. So they're going to be just active components. And then we just pass our type in, which is our core team manager interface. We need to pass the class. So that gives us an array of, it's only going to be one, right? Array of one. So what we want to do is just check if we found something. So we're just going to check index 0, and if that's valid, then it's a team manager component, and we can assign it. So we can set the object, and we can set the interface. And for the interface, we need to cast it to our type because it's currently it's a UActor component, so we need to cast it to the. Oh, that's I, not you, the object interface. This is the first time we come in and we assign it. So now what we want to do is return whether it's valid or not. So it's opposite of. If we tried to go through here and it still failed at whatever part, then we just want to return false so we don't try and use this. But if this returns true, then we know this is all good to go. And then to use that, we just team manager interface and we can use it and we know it's good. So the first thing I want to do for the player as just a demo is we're going to change the color of our box select. Now, I know most people probably wouldn't want to do that, right? Like you don't want your box select to be all these different team colors, but it's just a good demo, I think, and it's the only thing I've got implemented in the game at the moment that I can show. So we check that we have a box select, and then we're going to need to implement a function on our box select. So whenever you're going to change materials, you need a dynamic material instance. You can't do it just on a material, right? We'll need a function on our box select. So in our custom box select widget, we just need a function to get the dynamic material that's on our U border here. And that has a function to get or create a dynamic material. So we're just creating a function to access that. So action avoid, we want it to be a U material instance dynamic. And we'll call it just get dynamic. And this can be const because we're just sort of calling another function. So if our box is good, on the box, actually we probably can just do a return. Okay. So this automatically handles creating a dynamic material. We can call that function back in now. We can close that off. Put a widget. Yep. We only want to continue if we can get a valid one, so do it in an if. Now we know we've got a dynamic material. We can then call on our teams manager to start setting what we need to set. Okay. So now we've got on our teams manager, we've got access to these interface functions that we set up, and we want to set the team data to a material, a box material, and so we just have to pass the team and the material. So we can go box material, go put it around the wrong way. There we go. So that's the player sort of set up, and later on you'll probably have, for the player, you'll probably have UI stuff and whatnot going on. So yeah, we'll look at that later. But the next thing we want to do is we sort of want a similar setup for entities. So the actual units themselves, they'll be on this player's team, but we still want to be able to control their team and change their colors and do whatever. So let's go to we need to go to our entity component. So under RTS entities, we'll come to components, entities components, and we'll come to the entity component. And we need to do two things in here. We sort of need a similar setup for the team manager. So let's just copy the player controller. So you could, on the entity, you could utilize this function here, but then you'd need to have a reference to the owning player controller all the time. So we're just going to sort of duplicate this. So we're not going to need the team change. We're going to implement that different, but let's just copy all of this, bring it over. All right. Put it at the very bottom here. So don't delete all of that, just change it to onRep team ID, and we'll just keep the old team ID. But we'll need to include the forward declaration for our Teams Manager interface, and then we want another, actually this can be under private, this a bit all over the place here. That probably should have had a U property. I think you can have a U property. Yeah, so I might just come back to our player controller and add that. Otherwise it could get garbage collected. Okay. Yeah, and then the other thing we want here, another U property, needs to be replicated using. Don't include that. Don't do that. What we're going to do is I'm going to set up a separate section here for the actual team. What's happening here is, if you recall, on the player, if we come down to teams, the player handles everything through the player state. But what the entity is going to do, they're going to use the entity component to handle all of it. So they need to implement this teams interface and the team interface functions and parameters. So implement that on the entity component. And then come to that player state, and let's just copy the whole interface over the top. Put this in a separate section above. So this will just be the team manager things down here, and this will be the actual team interface implementation. This one will be an easy one, right? This is exactly the same. So let's just implement that and copy it from our player controller. So back on our entities component, that's all good. That's good. So let's just implement these. We will go back to the player state because these will be the same, right? Generic team ID. If you recall, we're doing this push mode for replication, so we need to set that up. I'm not going to have a has authority, but I think we might create one. So let's just do that first. Put it here under begin play. Cool. So the authority we need to check is if the owner has authority. So we'll check we've got an owner and that owner has authority. And then we need to have the include for the push model, which is that. And to use that, we're going to need some replication settings, but we also are going to need in the build.cs for entities. I think this is the first one we've done. We are going to need to add we add net core, and that'll sort out our push model and reference that correctly. And I might just come to Teams info here and copy this. So we want the params and the team ID. Close that. Yep, that'll do. Back down to it. And then on our player state, I'm going to copy this additional broadcast to our on-rep. There's one more thing I want to do here. I might need to do it on that player state too, actually, is we need to call the on-rep. So I read up about this because I was wondering if the push model did this, you still need to do this, and it said I found that it said that you didn't, but in testing it was needed, so I don't know. Well, I might just copy that to the player state. Alright, we shouldn't need that player state anymore. We want to do this. In the probably want to do to the Teams Manager interface. Default that to non-owner. Do that on the player control as well. Okay. So that's our interface set up. Got the team manager set up. Now we want to, so in the on-rep, is where we're going to handle any changes to any of to this entity's colors for anything, right? So what we're going to do for demonstration purposes is change the decal color and change the highlight color. So we're going to create some functions for that, and I'll put them under team management, protected, make them virtual. You know, this could probably be private on here. I don't think entities, like we might need it public on the player controller, but I don't think we need it public on the, let me move that down. Right. Move it back up if we need to. Let's look at where we're going to call this first. So the set get decal team is going to happen in the on-ramp. When we change teams, bam, done. And then the so the highlight is, it's got to be handled a little bit different because it's an overlay. We're using an overlay, I'm not using an outline. Overlays are I found are a bit finicky with getting a dynamic material, but I figured it out. But we have to handle a bit different. So what we want is another property here for the dynamic material for the highlight. And this is just to save us recreating it and looking it up. I'll show you what we're doing with it currently. I'll just this, and it's going to be a new material instance dynamic. So the way we're doing the highlight at the moment, if we come back up, is sort of looking it up from the data, and then we're setting it. So we're just going to make this a bit more efficient. We don't want to do this, we've already done it. We just want to have a reference, and that's what that property is for. So we're just going to say if our dynamic highlight material, then we're going to do some creating a dynamic. We're going to start looking at creating this, but if it's not, so we do have a, we're just going to do that again. If it's not equal to null, then we'll set this highlight. But so that'll skip this if it's already set. And then to reset it, to change teams on the on-rep, rather than call the function, we're just going to set that back to null. So erasing the material. And then when a highlight occurs, then it'll go recreate it. But we need to do some more steps in there. So let's go back to our highlight. This will be our material. Pull that out. That's getting it from our data and loading it. But then once we've got it, we actually need to get the parent, the material instance dynamic. So what we'll do is we'll just check that we have a material instance dynamic on, or it is a material instance dynamic, I should say. I'm going to call it MID for material dynamic. And we want to cast. We've cast it to a dynamic material instance. Now we just need to get the parent. So we need to assign this as the parent. Oh, sorry, this is meant to be an interface. We need to change that to an interface, and that allows us to assign it that way. I had a lot of trouble with this for the overlay material, but this is what I found somewhere. Can't remember where. Now that we have a dynamic highlight material, well, we have a parent, right? So this is what this is. We need to create the dynamic highlight material from that. So material instance, and that's a static function on there, correct? And we just need to pass the material, so the highlight material, and the component that we're the object, right? So currently in a for loop up here for components. And then once we've got that, then we're going to run our set highlight. First time this will run, it'll get the material instance, create it, do whatever it needs to do, set the team color, and then it'll set the overlay. The second time we highlight this entity, it'll just set the overlay. We unhighlight, removes the overlay. So all this stuff only needs to happen the once. Right, so let's go back to the decal component. Oh, no, sorry, let's we haven't finished this part yet. So to actually now set what we want to set here for the highlight is we have to check we have the team manager interface and we have a dynamic material. That's just a safety precaution in case all that stuff just somehow stops up. On our teams manager interface now, which we know is valid, we want to get the interface, we want to apply the team data to a material again. So it's going to be team ID and the dynamic material. So when this occurs, this is going through to here, and if you remember on the Teams Manager component, we implemented these, and it's going to go through to the Teams data asset and run these parameters over the material. So if it has any of these or these or these, it's going to set them to the appropriate ones. Go over this more when we get into the editor and we set these up. It might make a bit more sense. So now the decal component, which is a bit different because we can just sort of get the decal component, set the color. So to get our decal component, we're going to need a lookup because I believe we have a. So it's sort of just sending off a broadcast to select. So in here, let's just get a. So that's our decal component. We need to include the select the decal component.h. We come to our decal component, just under the has to be public obviously, and make it static. And we're going to return a decal component. We want to pass in the entity that it's assigned to, and then here we're just going to return if the entity is valid. Otherwise, I'll just no. Alright, got the pointer. So then this, we can just call this from the component here on the class static. We just pass in the owner. So if we did cover the decal component, and we're sort of in the same boat here, we only need to check for the interface here. But then we've got a function especially for decal components. So apply team data to decal component. We just send the decal component. So the reason why we didn't put it in an onChanged function here is the onRep is going to work for both server and client. So things like a decal component, for example, is only going to show up on the client. You don't need it on the server. Same for the selection overlay. You don't want to select a unit and the other players can see what you're selecting. It's all client side. So one thing we need to do before we finish up is actually assign our team now. So now that the entity implements the teams interface, we want to actually assign its team. So we're going to come back to the player controller. I'm going to come down to the create entities. And we have this all to do here. So we're going to create a function for that, and it'll be assign entity team. And we actually need to pass the entity. So we're going to need a reference to our entity component. Then we want to cast that to our team interface. We don't want to cast the entity component to the team's interface. This is actually for the player. So we're going to get the player state because the player, we want the entity to be the same team as the player that's creating it. So this is going to be the player state. On the entity component, rather than cast to the, we could cast to the team interface, I guess. But we've already got a reference here, and as long as it's public, we should be able to set generic. I think I forgot the public. There's meant to be public. go. And then here we want to pass in the player's team. So it'll be team interface, whatever their team is. And because that's not changing anything here, we can make it constant, I think. Oh, sure. The last thing before we start firing up the editor, that's a mistake. So setting team on the AI controller, we can take that to do out. I did want to come to the AI controller, so the AI controller base, and inside the I think state perception, we have the attitude check that we want to implement. So here, check it out to do. Here we want to get our team interface. That's going to be from our, to get the team interface now, we're going to have to do it from our entity component. So because that is going to happen potentially a fair bit, we don't want to be looking up components over and over. So we're going to create a reference to it that we'll assign the first time via entity component. Fine to look up components now and again, but you're going to be doing it fairly often. Best to store it in a variable. And we're going to store that on begin play for creating that. Begin play should be fine, right? So the creating the component, setting the team, and then we add the AI controller, which is then the begin play. I was thinking maybe we should put in on possess, but I think begin play would be fine. I'll do a check if entity component and the entity, just use get pawn. So that's our entity component assigned. And we could set up like a has entity component thing there as like we did for the theme manager. So it'll assign it like this if it hasn't got it. But I think that'll be enough. Right? Need to go crazy. So go back to state perception. Check do we have entity component. And then we can get our reference to our team interface, and we're just going to be reading it, so it can be const. So now we can check the team, right? So we can go team interface. What is it? Get team attitude towards. And this is what's implemented on the, so it's not on our teams interface, but it's automatically implemented on this generic teams interface. And you can see what it's doing. It's using this get attitude thing here. It's checking the attitude of teams, and you can override this and change the way it all works. By default, though, if they're not on the same team, then it's going to come up as enemy, I believe. So we're not going to go customizing this or anything. Oh, and it's, sorry, not enemy, it's called hostile. So what we need to pass in here is the other actor, which is what we spotted, right? So it's going to be key. And we're going to check if that attitude is equal towards team attitude hostile. So you now know, sorry, this has to be reference. Anything inside this bracket now is an enemy. So we can create a list of hostiles. So is going to be a hostile. So as we go through this, all the perceived actors, we can track the hostiles. So let's create an array actor. Perceived hostiles. And add to that the oh, sorry, I don't need a. And then what we can do too is we can update our last seen hostile timer. So that's why we had this scene time. So we can then say, well, we've just seen a hostile. So I'll make that hostile time. I haven't created this yet, so might replicate this too. You know, it might be something you want to display on a UI later, so have it replicated. It might just be an icon or something But yeah, anyway, something you might want to access. See that. Copy that from somewhere. Network.h in, and this is called last seen hostile time. Like it wants to start. Oh, so entity component. You can just do these in the header to initialize, uninitialize. Go. And then, so that array, we're not really doing anything with it outside this update perception. So then we can add a function in here. So if, yeah, I'm just going to call it report hostiles, pass it that array. Now let's do this. The way I'm going to handle, I don't want to get into combat here, but the way I'm going to handle is they report the hostiles to the group, and then the group does its thing. So I'm just going to add a to do here. I'll come back to this. Maybe we can put some debug here to test our perception at that point. So I'm going to do a build now, just to see if we've got errors, and there won't be. We did get some warnings, and that's probably missing. Yeah, I thought it might be that. So if you open up the entities, copy this RTS core into the Teams view plugin, and then just copy this, put a comma after the core one, change this to. That's all that's just so when you install the plugins it says, hey, if you're installing this plugin you need these ones. And we're in the editor. I'm going to stop here, and we've got a lot to do in the editor. There's a lot of setup to do for both the AI and the team, so there's going to be a fair bit. So I'm going to cut it here, and we'll come back and do that in the next part. If you're enjoying this tutorial series, give us a subscribe if you want to keep following, or a like, and I'll see you in the next part. Thanks for watching.